The Korath ship hovered silently above Valaris 7, its sleek hull reflecting the dim glow of the distant star. Inside, the alien scientists spoke in clipped tones, their long, segmented limbs moving with precision. Larka, the bioengineered wolf, lay in the containment field below them, her body weakened but defiant. Her luminous eyes glared at her captors as her newborn cubs huddled against her flank. The air crackled with tension as the Korath deliberated her fate. "Her aggression protocols are unstable," one scientist said, his voice devoid of emotion. "The offspring are likely to exhibit the same flaw. There is no point in further resource allocation." Another scientist, slightly taller, leaned forward. "Her cognitive markers are exceptional, but the cost of control outweighs the benefit. We cannot risk a repeat of the Carxus incident." A silent consensus rippled through the room. Moments later, the containment field dissolved, and Larka and her cubs were unceremoniously dumped onto the surface of the desolate planet. The ship ascended, leaving them behind in a cloud of dust. Above, the alien commander's final words echoed in Larka's mind, clear through the implants still embedded in her brain. "You are in error. Errors are erased." On the surface, Larka struggled to her feet, her powerful frame marred by injuries from the Quartha's experiments. She surveyed her surroundings, a barren wasteland with jagged rock formations and sparse vegetation. Her cubs whimpered, their tiny bodies trembling against the cold. Larka nuzzled them, letting out a low growl that carried both comfort and determination. If the Korath thought she would succumb to their abandonment, they had underestimated her will to survive. A few kilometers away, Captain Amelia Tran adjusted the visor on her helmet, scanning the terrain for signs of unusual activity. The military outposts she was stationed at rarely had much to report, but today something felt off. Her sensors had picked up an unidentified Korath vessel in the atmosphere earlier, but it had disappeared before she could gather more data. Now, she was tracking faint energy readings leading toward the planet's southern quadrant. Her armored boots crunched against the rocky ground as she made her way toward the signal. She wasn't expecting to find much, maybe a discarded piece of alien tech or the remnants of a failed experiment. What she found instead made her freeze in place. A massive, wolf-like creature stood between two jagged rock spires, its fur a mottled silver streaked with patches of dark blood. Beside it were three cubs, barely more than shadows clinging to their mother's side. The creature's eyes locked onto hers, intelligent and calculating, but also filled with something that caught Amelia off guard: pain. Her first instinct was to raise her weapon, the barrel of her plasma rifle glowing faintly as it powered up. The brief hum of the weapon startled one of the cubs, which let out a high-pitched yelp before scurrying behind its mother. The larger wolf bared her teeth, stepping in front of her cubs, her body coiled like a spring ready to snap. Amelia hesitated. This wasn't the mindless predator her training had warned her about. The creature was clearly protective of its young, and its movements weren't driven by blind rage but by a calculated understanding of the threat before it. "Easy," Amelia said softly, lowering her weapon. She kept her voice steady, though her pulse raced. "I'm not here to hurt you." The wolf didn't move, its sharp eyes tracking her every step as she slowly knelt and placed her rifle on the ground. Amelia reached into her pack and pulled out a protein ration, tearing the packaging open and placing it on a flat rock a few meters away. She backed away, maintaining eye contact but giving the creature space. For a long moment, nothing happened. The cubs whimpered softly, their tiny forms trembling with hunger and exhaustion. The mother sniffed the air, her ears twitching. Finally, she took a tentative step forward, her movements deliberate and cautious. She sniffed the ration, then picked it up delicately with her teeth before retreating to her cubs. They pounced on the food with fervor, and the mother watched them closely, her gaze occasionally flicking back to Amelia. Amelia stayed where she was, resisting the urge to move or speak further. Her mind raced with questions. Why had the Korath abandoned these creatures here? What were they, really? And why did she feel a pang of guilt watching them struggle to survive? Hours passed as Amelia observed from a distance, her presence no longer drawing immediate hostility from the wolf. She noted the creature's behavior, The way it nudged its cubs to eat first, the way it scanned the horizon for danger, the deliberate precision of its movements. This wasn't just an animal. There was intelligence here, maybe even sentience. As the sky darkened, Amelia decided to return to her outpost. She left another ration near the same rock before she went, glancing back once to see the wolf watching her, its luminous eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. Something about that gaze stayed with her, a silent plea or perhaps a challenge. Either way, she knew she couldn't leave them to die. Not yet. The following day, Amelia returned to the wolves' location, her thoughts clouded with conflicting emotions. She had spent the night poring over every protocol in the colonial military manual, trying to rationalize her actions. What she was doing was reckless and against orders. The Korath were allies in name, but their secrecy and ruthlessness had made them far from trustworthy. Yet, the image of the starving cubs and their injured mother lingered in her mind, a silent accusation she couldn't ignore. She approached the rocky outcrop cautiously, her eyes scanning the surroundings for any sign of the wolves. The protein rations she had left the night before were gone, but the creatures were nowhere in sight. For a moment she wondered if they had moved on, but then a low, warning growl reached her ears. She froze, raising her hands slowly to show she wasn't a threat. Larka stepped into view, her silver fur shimmering faintly in the pale light. Her stance was tense but less aggressive than the previous day. Behind her, the cubs peeked out cautiously, their bright eyes fixed on Amelia. She knelt down, lowering herself to their level, and carefully placed another ration on the ground. This time, she didn't retreat as far. The wolf hesitated, her sharp eyes studying Amelia with an intensity that made the human feel exposed. Then, with a deliberate slowness, Larka approached the ration and picked it up, retreating a few steps before placing it in front of her cubs. They pounced on it eagerly, their small growls and yips echoing off the rocks. Larka turned her gaze back to Amelia, a flicker of something new in her expression, curiosity, perhaps. Amelia stayed still, her heart pounding. She knew she was being tested. The wolves weren't mindless predators. They were calculating her every move, weighing whether she was a threat or an ally. She decided to push her luck and spoke softly. "You don't trust me yet. I get it. But you don't have to do this alone." Larka tilted her head slightly, her ears twitching at the sound of Amelia's voice. The cubs, emboldened by their mother's lack of aggression, began inching closer to Amelia. One of them, smaller and darker than the others, let out a tentative bark and stepped forward, sniffing the air around her. Amelia remained perfectly still, her breath shallow as the tiny creature approached. It sniffed her boot, then let out a curious yip before retreating to its siblings. "That's right," Amelia murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not here to hurt you." Over the next few days, a fragile routine emerged. Amelia would arrive each morning, bringing food and water, and sit nearby as the wolves ate. Larka remained cautious but began to tolerate her presence, allowing her cubs to explore their surroundings more freely. Amelia marveled at their behavior, noting how Larka guided them with subtle nudges and growls. It was a language of its own, intricate and deliberate. It wasn't long before Amelia began to notice something even more extraordinary. When she watched Larka closely, she felt faint impressions in her mind, flashes of emotions, images, even vague ideas. At first, she thought it was her imagination, but the sensations grew stronger with each encounter. The cubs, too, seemed to emit these mental pulses, their young minds broadcasting feelings of curiosity, hunger, and playfulness. One afternoon, as Amelia sat watching the wolves from a safe distance, she decided to test the theory. She picked up a small stone and held it out in her palm, projecting a simple thought: safe. Larka's ears twitched, and she turned to look at Amelia. After a moment, she approached cautiously, her glowing eyes fixed on the stone. Amelia placed it on the ground and backed away, feeling a faint sense of acknowledgement, not words, but an impression of understanding. "You really are something else," Amelia said softly, a mix of awe and respect in her voice. The breakthrough came later that evening when a sudden storm rolled over the planet. Amelia had been preparing to leave when the sky darkened, and the wind picked up, howling through the rocky terrain. She hesitated, glancing toward the wolves' makeshift den. The shelter was flimsy at best and unlikely to withstand the storm. "Damn it!" she muttered, grabbing her gear and heading back toward their location. When she arrived, the wolves were huddled together, the cubs whining in fear as rain pelted down around them. Larka stood protectively over her young, her body braced against the wind, but it was clear they couldn't stay there. Amelia hesitated, knowing the risk she was about to take. She approached slowly, her hands outstretched. "You're not going to make it out here. Let me help." Larka growled, a warning, but there was no malice in it, only fear. Amelia stepped closer, kneeling a few meters away. She reached into her pack and pulled out a thermal blanket, laying it on the ground as she projected a single, clear thought: shelter. The response was immediate. Larka's mind pressed against hers, an explosion of images and feelings: fear for her cubs, distrust of the strange human, but also a desperate hope for survival. Amelia stayed still, letting the storm rage around them, until finally, Larka stepped forward, her cubs trailing behind her. Together they moved to a nearby cave Amelia had scouted earlier. It wasn't perfect, but it was dry and sheltered from the worst of the wind. Amelia set up a small heater and some emergency rations, watching as the wolves settled into the space. Larka's gaze never left her, but there was something different now, an unspoken truce, a tentative bond formed in the crucible of survival. As the storm raged outside, Amelia sat against the cave wall, exhaustion pulling at her. She glanced at Larka, who was lying with her cubs nestled against her. The wolf met her eyes, and for the first time, Amelia felt a clear, unmistakable message in her mind: gratitude. Amelia woke to the faint hum of her comm device, a signal she'd almost forgotten about in the chaos of the past few days. Her eyes darted toward the wolves, who were still resting, Larka's sharp ears twitching at the sound but her body remaining relaxed. Amelia retrieved the device from her pack, scanning the encrypted message flashing across the screen. It was a warning. The Korath were returning. The message was brief and cold, issued from her outpost commander. A stealth unit had been dispatched to eliminate any remaining, experimental assets, and ensure the security of their operation. The subtext was clear: destroy all evidence, including any witnesses. Her chest tightened as she realized they meant to kill not only the wolves but likely anyone who had discovered their existence. Amelia glanced at Larka and her cubs. The thought of these creatures, so intelligent, so full of potential, being hunted and exterminated ignited a surge of anger. She turned off the comm device and began packing her gear. She couldn't let it happen. Not without a fight. By mid-morning, she had scouted the terrain surrounding the cave. The rocky outcrop provided natural cover, and the narrow entrance would make it difficult for attackers to approach unnoticed. She began setting up makeshift defenses, using her military training to rig trip alarms and small explosive charges to create distractions. She had no illusions about her chances against Korath technology, but she wasn't about to roll over and let them slaughter the wolves without a fight. As she worked, Larka watched her closely, her intelligent eyes tracking every movement. The bond they had begun to form felt stronger now, an unspoken understanding growing between them. Amelia could sense it in the way Larka moved closer, no longer hesitant, and in the flashes of thought that flickered in her mind, a mixture of curiosity and concern. "They're coming for you," Amelia said aloud, her voice steady despite the tension coursing through her. "But we're not going to make it easy for them." Larka growled softly, a sound that carried no aggression but felt more like agreement. Amelia nodded, her resolve hardening. The first sign of the Koratha's arrival was a faint vibration in the ground, barely perceptible but enough to set Larka on edge. She rose to her feet, her ears pinned back, her body coiled like a spring. Amelia crouched behind a rock, gripping her plasma rifle tightly as she scanned the horizon. Moments later, the sleek outline of a Korath dropship appeared against the dull gray sky, its engines eerily silent as it descended. Two figures emerged, their movements fluid and precise. Korath soldiers, clad in adaptive camouflage that shimmered to match the rocky terrain. They moved with practiced efficiency, their weapons sweeping the area as they advanced toward the cave. Amelia's heart raced as she activated the first trap, a small explosive charge buried in the ground a few meters from their position. The detonation was loud enough to disorient the soldiers, scattering debris and forcing them to halt. Amelia took the opportunity to fire, her plasma rifle sending a streak of blue energy toward the nearest figure. The shot struck their shield, causing a brief flicker of light before dissipating. The soldier staggered but recovered quickly, their weapon pivoting toward her position. Before they could fire, Larka lunged from the shadows, her massive frame colliding with the soldier in a blur of motion. Her jaws clamped onto their weapon, ripping it from their grasp before slamming them to the ground. The soldier's armor cracked under her weight as she snarled, her cubs yipping from the safety of the cave. The second soldier turned, aiming their weapon at Larka, but Amelia was faster. She fired a precise shot that struck their leg, forcing them to drop to one knee. The soldier retaliated, a bolt of energy searing the rock near her head as she ducked for cover. Larka's cubs, sensing the danger, began emitting high-pitched whines that reverberated through the air. Amelia felt the strange mental pulses again, stronger this time, waves of confusion and fear radiating outward. The injured soldier faltered, their movements becoming sluggish as if they were struggling to think. Amelia took advantage of their hesitation, firing another shot that disarmed them completely. The battle was brief but intense. When it was over, the two Kora soldiers lay incapacitated, one unconscious and the other pinned beneath Larka's unrelenting weight. Amelia approached cautiously, her rifle trained on the conscious one. She could see the fear in their alien eyes, a stark contrast to the cold confidence they had exuded moments before. "Why?" she demanded, her voice cutting through the tense silence. "Why leave them here just to come back and kill them?" The soldier glared at her, their segmented jaw twitching. "They are unstable. Dangerous. We are correcting a mistake." Amelia's grip on her rifle tightened. "They're not a mistake. They're survivors. More than I can say for your kind." The soldier's gaze flicked to Larka, who growled softly, her teeth inches from their throat. "You don't understand what they're capable of." "I understand enough," Amelia shot back. "Enough to know they're not the mindless weapons you think they are. They deserve a chance." The soldier remained silent, their expression unreadable. Amelia stepped back, gesturing for Larka to release them. The wolf hesitated, her growl deepening, but eventually stepped away. The soldiers scrambled to their feet, retrieving their fallen weapon. They glanced at Amelia and Larka one last time before retreating toward the dropship, dragging their unconscious comrade with them. Amelia didn't lower her rifle until the dropship disappeared into the sky. Only then did she turn to Larka, who was standing protectively in front of her cubs. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, a silent understanding passing between them. "We're not done yet," Amelia said softly. "But I think they're starting to realize what they're up against." Amelia sat near the cave entrance, her back pressed against the cool stone as she stared at the empty horizon. The adrenaline from the confrontation had begun to wear off, leaving her with a bone-deep exhaustion. Larka and her cubs rested a few meters away, the mother wolf keeping a watchful eye on her surroundings even in repose. The quiet felt fragile, as if the planet itself held its breath, waiting for the next move. The faint hum of her comm device broke the silence. Amelia hesitated before answering, knowing what was likely coming. The encrypted message displayed on the screen was from her commanding officer, terse and impersonal. "Immediate return to base required. Unauthorized actions reported. Expect disciplinary review." She let out a bitter laugh. It wasn't unexpected. Her refusal to report back after intercepting the Quartha's activity had likely raised every red flag in the system. She imagined her superiors piecing together the fragments of her actions, trying to reconcile the notion that one of their soldiers had gone rogue to protect creatures deemed lethal by an advanced alien race. Turning off the device, she looked back at Larka. The wolf was alert, her ears swiveling toward Amelia as if sensing her unease. The cubs played nearby, their energy seemingly endless despite the stress of their ordeal. One of them, the smallest, bounded toward her, yipping excitedly before dropping a smooth stone at her feet. Amelia couldn't help but smile. Guess you've already decided I'm part of the pack, huh? She murmured, reaching out to scratch behind the cub's ears. The little creature leaned into her touch, a rumble of contentment vibrating through its tiny frame. Her mind churned as she considered her options. Returning to base wasn't just a risk to her career, it was a risk to the wolves. The Korath wouldn't stop with a failed stealth team, they would escalate. Diplomacy would only hold so long as there was plausible deniability, but the existence of these wolves threatened to expose something much darker. If the Korath's bioengineering experiments became public knowledge, it could shatter the uneasy alliance between them and humanity. The thought made her stomach turn. She glanced at Larka again, her determination hardening. She couldn't abandon them. Not now. By nightfall, Amelia had made her decision. The wolves needed sanctuary, somewhere the Korath couldn't reach them. She tapped into her comm device, encrypting a transmission to an off-world contact, an old friend stationed on a research vessel orbiting a neutral planet. The message was simple and direct, outlining the situation without naming specifics. I need transport for classified cargo. Non-negotiable. She hit send, hoping her contact's sense of loyalty outweighed the questions this would undoubtedly raise. Time was running out. As the hours passed, Amelia busied herself preparing for the journey. She fashioned a makeshift harness for Larka, sturdy enough to help her navigate the rough terrain while protecting her cubs. The wolf tolerated the process with surprising patience, her sharp eyes watching every movement. It was as if she understood the stakes. When the reply came through, Amelia felt a wave of relief. The message was brief but affirmative. A dropship would rendezvous at a nearby clearing in 12 hours. It wasn't much time, but it was enough. She turned to Larka, crouching to meet her gaze. This is it, she said softly. One last push, and we're out of here. The journey to the rendezvous point was grueling. The terrain was uneven, the sharp winds cutting through Amelia's gear as they pressed forward. Larka led the way, her movements graceful despite the injuries that still hadn't fully healed. The cubs followed closely, their energy flagging as the hours wore on. Amelia's thoughts drifted as they walked. She wondered what kind of life awaited these creatures beyond Valaris 7. Would they be safe, or would they always be hunted? More importantly, could humanity learn to see them as more than weapons or threats? She didn't have answers, but she knew one thing: they deserved the chance to find out. As dawn broke, the clearing came into view. The dropship hovered above the ground, its ramp already extended. Amelia felt a pang of unease. It was too quiet. No sign of the Korath, but she knew better than to assume they had given up. Her instincts were proven right moments later. The faint whine of an incoming projectile reached her ears just in time for her to shove Larka and the cubs toward the ship. A small explosion rocked the ground behind them, sending debris flying. Amelia turned, her rifle at the ready, as a squad of Korath soldiers emerged from the tree line. Larka snarled, placing herself between the soldiers and her cubs. The creatures had no weapons, but their mere presence radiated a defiance that made the Korath hesitate. Amelia fired a warning shot, the plasma bolt striking the ground near their feet. "This ends here," she shouted, her voice carrying over the din. "You don't want to do this." One of the soldiers stepped forward, their weapon trained on her. "You can't protect them. They are unstable, uncontrollable. Their existence jeopardizes everything." Amelia's grip on her rifle tightened. "Their existence exposes your failure. That's what this is really about, isn't it? You can't stand the thought of being wrong." The soldier hesitated, their stance faltering for a fraction of a second. It was all the opening Larka needed. The wolf let out a low growl, her thoughts pressing into Amelia's mind. Go. Now. Protect. ***. Amelia didn't argue. She turned, urging the cubs up the ramp as Larka held her ground. The wolf's massive frame blocked the soldier's line of sight, buying Amelia the precious seconds she needed to secure the cubs inside the ship. "Larka!" she shouted, her voice cracking with emotion. "Come on!" The wolf turned, her glowing eyes meeting Amelia's for a brief moment before she bounded up the ramp. The dropship's engines roared to life, lifting off just as another explosion shook the clearing. Amelia collapsed against the interior wall, her heart pounding as she watched the planet grow smaller beneath them. Larka settled near her cubs, her body tense but uninjured. Amelia reached out, her hand brushing against the wolf's fur. For the first time, she felt something beyond gratitude in Larka's thoughts, a sense of trust, of acceptance. "You're safe now," Amelia said softly, though the words felt like a promise to herself as much as to the wolves. "You're free." The dropship hurtled toward the stars, leaving Valaris 7 behind. What lay ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, Amelia felt a glimmer of hope. Larka and her cubs were survivors, and now, so was she.